Hello everyone, my name is Aaron, aka Aaron711. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Loading Screen, a podcast about indie games, indie developers, and video game development. Today we have a very special guest with us. He's one of the voices behind Linux Radio, a member of the game studio Mechanical Ink, and a creator of the indie game Reaction. It's Ioni, aka Ioni Ink. We'll be chatting about generating hype for your games. I'll be providing feedback about Ioni's game, Reaction, and so much more. Thank you again, Ioni, for being here today. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Ioni. Thanks Aaron for having me here on the show today. I'm a small hobbyist game dev. Been doing this for quite a while now, although I don't really have that many games to show it, sadly. Started doing some things in the mid to late 2000s when I was still in high school. I think most of those are kind of lost now. And it was a very different landscape back then. So sure, you had like small indie teams or hobbyist teams that were like doing their own graphics engines and coding their own stuff. But you also had like, now it's like the big trinity. It's Unity, Godot, and Game Maker. Back then, like you had the million types of software like Irlicht or Ogre 3D, which were like more well-established graphic engines, although I don't think anybody produced anything using them till pretty late in their lifespan, and by then they were already superseded by Unity and Game Maker. You had like all sorts of point and click, RTS, RPG maker type software, but they weren't, I mean, they were pretty much disconsidered by the pros. And you didn't have this indie explosion back then. I mean, of course, Cave Story was a cult classic, more or less, but people weren't that much interested in doing retro style games as much as they were like remaking older games, not necessarily NES or Genesis games, but they were more interested in remaking games that they played when they were young, on the Commodore, on Atari computers, on the ZX Spectrum. I mean, I was a ZX Spectrum kid myself, so I had a lot of nostalgia for that. And you had forums, you had boards. I mean, gamedev.net was already a thing back then. You'd have like all of these software, they'd have their websites where you could publish them. But realistically speaking, I don't think anybody was making a living out of this back then. I mean, they'd post it there, they'd get some donations. The adventure game community, for instance, I mean, they have Adventure Game Studio, which is still going strong. There were some people who were making games, releasing them for free, but receiving some donations for director's cut versions or special commentary versions of their games. And you had some websites. I mean, they're not like now indie blogs or websites. They were like, let's say, secondhand gaming websites. Like Gamers Hell was a pretty big one, and they were desperate to write basically about anything. And whenever I had like a game ready, I think the last one I did before the one we're gonna talk today was in 2009. It was a pretty mediocre fighting game, and I sent an email to Gamers Hell, which was pretty big, and I think they covered the game. They wrote like pretty bad article. They like took my description and adapted it a bit, put some videos there, put a link to the website I had. It was a pretty interesting experience, but then it changed a lot. I mean, of course, you had like, I don't know, Limbo, Hotline Miami, later on Undertale. Many people would do retro style games or more experimental games, and gaming in general became something of a bigger thing. So of course you had a bigger public for indie stuff as well. And the thing is, now, last year I started working on this small puzzle game called Reaction, and I still had like the mentality from over a decade ago. I was thinking, okay, I'll finish it, then publish it on some forums, then write to a blog or two, and we'll see what happens. And it was quite funny because I had several moments when I realized, okay, I'm way behind with what's happening. First I realized, okay, you can't do that anymore. Forums are a dying thing. They're not what they used to be. Everybody writes, I don't know, on Reddit now. So then I started researching Reddit pages and I realized, okay, no, actually game dev Reddits, they're kind of dead as well. They've been dead since 2013. Everybody's moving to Twitter. Never had a Twitter account before then, so I went to Twitter, where you have some bots which retweet game dev stuff, and you start adding other people and they retweet your stuff, you retweet their stuff, and then you realize at one point that this is basically a bubble. You're retweeting inside the indie game dev bubble. So back to the research board, and I realized you need to go to Discord now, and that's actually where Aaron and me met. We met on the, what was it, solo game dev Discord?
Yes, the R solo development Discord.
Yeah, I think I researched a bit and found like 7 or 8 Discords, and it's kind of the same thing. You get really nice feedback in there. It's not like, it's not like the forums when you have like one huge post which is one half feedback, one half review, and then with some personal grievances if there's some beef between the developers there on the forum, or if there are some preconceived notions of what you should or shouldn't do. And it was nice on the Discords. I mean, you get good feedback, but again, I mean, these are people that also like playing games, not just making them. But it's not really the best way to get your game out there, to get it exposed. And yeah, naturally, I imagine if some PR specialist is listening now, they'll probably be laughing when they hear how naive all of this sounds. Then I realized, streaming is a pretty big thing. I mean, it's been for a while now, and more on Twitch than it is on YouTube. So apparently there's this interesting world, and now it makes more sense, because it was confusing to me. Why do all of these devs have their own Discord page? Okay, you have like a press kit and you contact these people, and it's interesting to keep your fans together, but I don't know, unless you're Pixel or Toby Fox or someone, why would you have a Discord? It seemed a bit arrogant. And it kind of makes sense to a degree, because streamers, even the small Twitch streamers, have their Discords. Devs have their Discord, so that's the best place to hang around. You go to the streamers page. Of course, you don't harass that person. You don't say, come on, play my game. You don't call them at 12 in the morning, 12 at night, depending on which time frame they are, and tell them, come on, play my game. Did you play my game? I sent it a week ago. When are you going to send it? But this seems to be the way to go. So you talk to people politely, of course, do some research first. If somebody only plays RPG games, you're not going to go, want to check my FPS. I know game genres are fluid, but I think you get the idea. And this is the direction I'm pursuing so far, trying to still cover those bases, post in some of the old forums, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook pages, but still trying to get in contact with streamers and YouTubers and people who do reviews and Let's Plays. And so far, well, just started out, so we'll see if it works out or not. I mean, of course, it should be adding that having a fun or an interesting game helps a lot. We'll see if that's the case for mine or not.
I mean, definitely, I definitely think your game is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, you got, I think, a lot of great points of, those are things that like I have looked at too, of just what platforms to go on. I would consider myself a newer dev, so I don't have newer being like within a year. So I had explored mainly Reddit, and I did notice that a lot of game devs had Twitters, like a good 95% of them, which I thought was really interesting. I did notice the trend of going to Discord to just mainly be a more interactive community towards a game or a creator. And then Twitch and YouTube and kind of just streaming in general have been, I think, more common now. And I guess I don't know the impact that actually has on streaming, on your game as a result of streaming. Like, I don't know how much, like, does streaming help, X amount for your game? Like, I mean, that's kind of what I was, I think, looking for in streaming. But I mean, I have to obviously start streaming a game start to finish and then see how well it did as a result to not streaming. Those are kind of my thoughts about it.
Yeah, I agree, and probably point this out because it might not be self-evident that all of these things we laid out. I mean, these platforms, it's not like boom, they're popular, then they die. They have like full lifespan, and you have several trends, and the trend right now is streaming. But streaming now isn't how it used to be, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. For instance, as a dev, mistake number one, maybe we'll get to that later, but calling my game a reaction was a pretty bad thing, because apparently now when person begins streaming, sometimes they fill in what game they play, and sometimes they just do a reaction video. So they just write reaction there, and I'll be notified, oh, somebody's playing reaction, and then I go, no, it's just somebody reacting to a video. And Twitch's own database, it's really weird. I mean, yeah, this is something I probably also should have added. You have like Moby Games is the classic one. You should probably add your game to the databases. Moby Games, Devel, IGDB, Giant Bomb, and it's such a nightmare all the time. Adding it, having the correct sizes, descriptions, getting in touch with mods. But Twitch, despite being like a billion-dollar company owned by $1 trillion company, up until last year still used like Google Docs survey type form if you wanted to add your cover to your game. And now it takes it automatically, but it always changes. The dev board, the view, the database, it takes its information from, first it was Giant Bomb, now it's in the game's database. So things change often overnight, so you can't simply say, okay, I'll wait till the last moment and then I'll get it on Twitch, because you might have already added it in a few places that influence the way Twitch indexes it.
I see. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I didn't think about actually adding my game to Twitch itself.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues I'm facing now, it's that, for instance, it took the description, but it won't take the cover. This is something I'm trying to fix right now, get Twitch to take the game's cover.
Oh man, that's cumbersome for sure.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good time to bring up one of the questions you brought up in the Discord, which kind of spawned our interaction with setting this up, was how do you go about generating hype and getting people to engage in your projects? And I mean, I thought that was a really good question, and it definitely made me think about it, primarily of why do you want hype in general? So I was curious of what your thoughts were.
As a general thought, it's this weird balance, because I'm not doing this for a living. Don't know if I'll ever do it. It remains to be seen. Probably not. So I don't live through the hype, and personally I think hype can often be detrimental. It creates this FOMO, this fear of missing out. At the same time, since there are a ton more games now than they used to be years back, it's impossible to keep an eye on something. I mean, again, you might see, well, this looks like a super cool retro pixel platformer that's hyped on Twitter. Then you scroll some more and see another one, and hype wears off. So the whole idea of hype, I mean, it's like a word that doesn't really have its own meaning, because I didn't really use it in the corporate sense. It wasn't in the marketing sense, like you'll have your legions of dedicated fans that will be total online and crusaders for your game and blindly play it until, I don't know, you don't remove it, republish it on time, or they discover you lied, and then they'll all turn on you. And yeah, maybe I used the word incorrectly. I was talking more in this way of building a community of players, of people that would be interested, and also like keeping them interested, because they might see it now, they might think this is pretty cool, it's something I'd want to see, either the game or maybe if you're one of those devs that do indie game jam style thing or adventure game series, so maybe they want to be hyped for one game or for a more long-term project, or I don't know, an MMO type thing, massive online, or a Minecraft type thing. It can be any of these. So maybe what I actually wanted to ask is, how do you reach the people that might want to play your game? Because quite often, I mean, some people know for sure, I want to play this and that, I only want to play indie platformers, I only want to play RPGs, but other people don't really, and I'm the same here, don't know about you. They don't know what they want to play until they're actually playing it. I didn't know I'd want to play Undertale until I got Undertale and played it and enjoyed it. Something like that. So that was my question and my overall issue. How exactly do you attract players in this hard to navigate sea of ideas, unfinished projects, concepts, and big companies pumping games all the time, etc.?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's also another interesting question of, yeah, how do you actually reach out to these people? I mean, it's, to me, I found the best is just word of mouth. So that's, I think, a good way. Like, I know I've got game recommendations from my friends, and primarily like I played Hollow Knight, and I had never really considered Hollow Knight. I'm not the biggest fan of like 2D platformers, but the art style to me was pretty compelling, and I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot, and it's probably one of my favorite 2D platformers now. So
Nice.
that's one way. I mean, having these like little smaller communities and just interacting with them and getting people's thoughts is one way. Game jams are another, I think, good way, because you not only make a game that maybe a genre you're not comfortable with, but also part of it is that you're playing other games during like the review process after the jam of, oh, like I actually kind of maybe like this strategy game, or this art style didn't really appeal to me at first, and after I played it, I feel like it really captivated me in some way. Or kind of the same thing with maybe storytelling. So I think playing the game jam games after like doing that review process is also another good way. I mean, even just there's sometimes I just go on to like itch.io and just search for kind of similar games that like are just genre based, that like if I want like a strategy game, or I want more of a kind of point and click, there's pretty actually good experiences that people have made on there. So it's probably more for that case an issue of just kind of search engine like optimization and making sure your game gets available when someone searches that. But part of it is kind of just hard to make people aware without being overly obsessive about it as well. Just making posts on like things like Twitter, trying to build that community on Discord, trying to stream it on Twitch, making YouTube videos about it. So, I mean, the more awareness I think you can generate, the better, in the hopes that you get kind of a greater engagement and someone will be attracted to some part of your game, whether it is the story, the art style, or the mechanics. And hopefully all those will intersect at some point where someone will decide that they take an interest in it and will slowly start to become more involved in learning about it. Another one like I haven't quite got into yet, but I really want to, is email. And I always think that's interesting because like I check my email, I would say pretty regularly, and I know of a couple game devs. One is Thomas Brush, who recently started doing it with his course, and I thought that was really good because I know I read his emails because I think he is a trusted source for information. So it's also like I've been watching his videos and exploring his content for quite a while since I've started doing game dev. But I mean, those are kind of like my thoughts of how I would try to go about it.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, the email idea is a pretty interesting one. I haven't thought about it, to be honest. Guess it sounded a bit old school, but that's probably the good thing about it. But it's also very similar. You mentioned the game jams. Yeah, it's similar because you have like some devs which you follow, or in the case of people that just play the games and don't develop them, you have like, I don't know, several, let's call them influencers for lack of a better term. So for instance, even if some people don't play that indie games that often, or didn't find one they like it, for instance, I don't know, they might follow some Conrad Zimmerman, and he said, I saw a few weeks back, hey, this game jam is happening, I liked these 10 games, maybe you should check some more, which is far better than, I don't know, you randomly decide, okay, I'll launch my game in August and hope the stars align, and people check itch.io in August and run into my game and, like you said, search for this specific category and something like that. But yeah, word of mouth indeed. I mean, it's because in reality, even if it's like in real life or on the internet or through some viral marketing. For instance, I sometimes see like stickers with QR codes for some indie games. Well, rarely, but sometimes I see those. It's a good way of spreading the word, because in reality many of the indie classics did become classics because of through word of mouth. That's how it worked in the end. And with your point, yeah, because I said earlier that you should talk to people and stuff like that, and it's okay to contact them. It's my opinion, who knows, maybe in reality this is wrong, to sound like a human being, so not like a faceless PR machine. Hello dear generic name, I'm very interested in your work, written in such a way which makes it obvious that you never watched a video or played a game or tried something by that person, and then big corp released big game, please give it a go. Yeah, I mean, it's even if it takes some time and effort, it's probably okay, at least even if you don't know that person before, unless it's a group newsletter or something, to have like a small idea who you're talking to and who you're addressing, even if it's a newsletter, so to cater it a bit to who you think the target would be.
Right. And yeah, kind of to touch on that a bit more, like I definitely think, I mean, being human is definitely a good thing to have when, reaching out to people, obviously. But yeah, I mean, finding the right people to talk to, I mean, going to like these influencers, whether that be on YouTube or on Twitch, or, just getting to know them a little bit more, and like, watching their videos and trying to kind of get a feel of kind of what they're about before you reach out, I think is always beneficial, because you can kind of definitely loop that into kind of how you interact with them. I watched X video, and based off that and your excitement for it, like I think you'd be maybe interested in trying this game out, and you can kind of tail it, what's the right word, guide it to your game, and just say, look at these similarities, and you're going to get a similar sort of vibe, but you'll get a different experience, and hopefully that experience is a good experience, and that's kind of up to you to kind of generate that.
Right. Because yeah, sometimes they just want more of the same, but other times, I mean, there's like a style or a type of game or a genre, but maybe you don't want the exact same thing. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I've watched, I don't know if you've ever heard of Devin Nash.
Devin Nash, don't think so. Let me Google.
He's a really good person who also streams, and he is really big on kind of the marketing business, particularly around the kind of gaming, but more on like the esports and marketing side. So I've been kind of watching a lot of his videos too. So he's a good one. And then Ludwig on Twitch, he is the self-proclaimed fastest growing Twitch streamer. But he had an interesting point in one of his videos about how to become a streamer, or how to become a good streamer. I don't remember the title. Of what he has this idea of he calls it yoink and twist, and it's the idea of you see an idea, or you take an idea from a video and add some sort of different secret sauce to it, or a different style or flavor to it, and essentially that will make it your own, and rather than trying to muster up this original idea that everyone has. Like, I guess to bring that back into kind of game design terms, like Hollow Knight, I'll use Hollow Knight as an example. It's just Hollow Knight, it's a really good game. You also see a lot of Hollow Knight sort of clones, so having
Metroidvanias,
adding some kind of different variety to that, and then kind of sharing that with potential influencer you think would also be interested, is I guess how I would think a good interaction would go.
Yeah, that's indeed a point. I mean, and if you want to go in design terms, an example that came to mind is pixel art more or less it was always there with the retro scene and stuff like that. I mean, there was a talk a few years back if is like pixel art its own art style, or is it something that's fully based in nostalgia and draws for it. And I mean, there are arguments for both sides, or you can be somewhere a bit in the middle, but the truth is that, I mean, many of the pixel art games we create today wouldn't have been possible in the 80s or 90s because of the limits of the technology. So yeah, that's why many of these retro games Hollow Knight or Shovel Knight, to have another game with Knight in the name. I mean, the ideas are not new, they're old. I mean, many of them even predate computer games and stuff like that, but the spin on it is what's there, or the extra element that have been possible back in the day or haven't been done since.
Right, yeah, I totally agree with that. The hardware definitely would not have been able to handle most of the pixel art games now. There's a lot going on, and I'm assuming the background to make that possible. And yeah, pixel art I think is definitely a style that, it's kind of a choice, to be honest, to do it. I mean, you have plenty of art styles, and there's plenty of talented artists to generate art. I think particularly for indie devs, I think people tend towards pixel art just because of the simplicity of it, in terms of like, I can generate a decent quality in a decent amount of time to be able to make my game. So I think that's why indies tend towards it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back again, it's like people who it was probably first brought by people who actually had nostalgia. I mean, true or rediscovered nostalgia, because I don't know, many people played NES games in the 2000s for the first times in their lives and loved them and stuff like that. And I remember there was this discussion back then, yeah, okay, you're bringing back pixel art, but nobody will want to see PS1 era graphics. That's not a style, that's just an old, outdated evolutionary step. But no, you go on itch and you find tons of people who use that for horror games because it has this uncanny valley sort of element, or for more minimalistic atmospheric games. I mean, yeah, in the end, all of these things can be adapted and recontextualized and made to presented in a new and engaging way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are good points, and I agree with that sentiment. Was there any other game dev questions that you guys had thought of that you would like to discuss?
The only things that I can still think of is we both like itch a lot, and itch.io is a great platform, and we'll have to see where it goes. I mean, now it has tons of games. It's more or less like Steam is for the serious big money project. GOG is for the classics and the big boys, while itch has everything for everyone. But I'm really curious to see also where it goes, because I also remember when indie games first started out, there was Desura, and I don't know if anybody remembers Desura nowadays. It was itch before itch was a thing. It was the same thing. It was like weaker version of Steam, where people would put their indie games and could download them, and of course many were far cheaper than they were on Steam. It was far easier to get there than it was at the time to get your game accepted on Steam. And then when it folded, basically it's like, I don't know, we'll probably never have a complete idea of how many games were lost forever. It's pretty sad if you come to think of it. And it also shifted the landscape a bit. I mean, yeah, we're now talking about pixel games with lots of pixel art, some fan games, a lot of these horror games or visual novels or whatever you had. I mean, the landscape back then on the Zero was pretty different. I mean, the tastes were different, and again, it's like a whole episode with all of these strategies for hypes, these fan bases, these communities that was like wiped out entirely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that. I mean, I think got into, I think particularly PC games pretty late, in terms of I was only familiar with Steam being, the one place to go to for PC games. I mean, I think I, played Flash games like growing up, like on like Addicted Games, but I think that was there was a large gap between, I guess, playing those Flash games and like really getting into PC games and eventually into game development. I mean, that's interesting that you lose like communities possibly by a platform not sort of keeping up.
Yeah, it was also because you mentioned Flash. I mean, last year, 2 years ago, when was it, where there was the big panic that Flash was going to be discontinued. So of course people were worrying, how are we going to save these games and animations and millions upon millions of projects that might be lost. And it's also this weird thing because Flash always had this rough edge, which was pretty cool overall. It was never like serious, it was never the big contender. I mean, I think you have a very small number of Flash games that ended up being standalone game. You can probably count them on one hand. And yeah, and this is still there to a degree because, you know, there are some games now, even Unity has the screen functions. You go on each and you have some games which you play directly in the browser on the spot, regardless what technology they use. It's kind of weird because a lot of effort gets put into this, and I feel like they never really receive much of the credit they deserve.
Yeah, okay, you're talking about the game engine developers who like make the, I guess, the games exportable so you can play them in the browser don't get enough credit.
Yeah, the devs that basically put their games only in the browser. So
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
yeah, now that Flash is no more, because on it you have quite a few cool games that you play directly on the website. They don't have downloads. Yeah, and I always got the feeling that they're not hyped as much as the ones you can download and play on your computer or on your Nintendo Switch or something.
Right, that's actually very true because there's a convenience factor to just being able to play it in the browser. So you get that experience sort of right away. But there have been, yeah, you kind of lowering the barrier to entry to play the game. I think downside, which is kind of what you're alluding to, is you don't really remember that experience all that well. Like I definitely remember a lot of games that I have downloaded from itch because I had to kind of put that initial effort into it of downloading the game, and then what is this game about? Like I have to kind of think of it of, is this game worth my time in downloading and kind of playing it all the way through?
Exactly, it's more immediate. Plus, I think there's like this mental preconception that when you click on a game that you're gonna play in the browser, you're expecting it to be a quick experience. You're never gonna go in thinking, who knows, maybe this will be a cool psychological horror experience or something like that. It'll always, at least that's the case for me, I always go with the preconceived notion that it's like a small gimmick thing, which is entirely unfair in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of been my experience. Maybe about like a good portion. I would say like 60 to 70% of the browser games I played on itch. Did you want to get into the reaction feedback?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to talk a bit about the game and the dev project process, or should we go directly to the feedback? How would you prefer to do this?
I actually prefer, yeah, if you could talk a little bit about it to kind of get some of the background behind maybe some of the details like about it, and then some of your kind of motivations, which you kind of already alluded to in your intro, but to kind of restate them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go a bit back to the place I left off there and take a slight detour. So after I launched the last game in the late 2000s, I was thinking, okay, this is not okay. I was using at the time, I think, one of these free graphic engines. I think it was Konitech K6 or something like that. It's like a total dinosaur now. And I thought, okay, I'll learn a bit of coding, do my own engine, which, you know, it's like there's a lot of hubris in that if you come to think of it. And because there was really no reason to do it at the time, but talked around a bit, met a lot of people, started learning all sorts of things, you know, do some audio editing on the side, do a bit of music there, do some video editing, image editing, all sorts of things, and trying to improve them a bit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to need a bigger team. I can't just annoy people, come on, please help me with this graphic thing. Or when I was in high school, I would ask a few classmates who had a copy of Photoshop or something, could you please do this type of effect or add something on that? In the end, I found a few friends, and one of them, who was at the time an aspiring fantasy writer, well, still is, she came with the idea, let's call this team Mechanical Ink, and I liked it. It was pretty catchy, and of course, the first idea was really bad. It was, let's do an RPG. It's going to be an isometric RPG like the one in the late 90s, very story focused, very different from anything else. I mean, I think if somebody would tell me now the premise from the first 10 seconds, I would say, no, that's a bad idea. Don't start with that. It's too ambitious, claiming not to be ambitious enough. And it was hard because one of the people was actually working in the games industry, another one was an artist, and we tried doing stuff around and it never really got anywhere. So then we said, okay, let's take it a bit easier, let's try to do like a story based platform game, and we're still working on this one from time to time. Hopefully in one of the following decades it will finally be out. It's like this puzzle, this platformer where you play a golem or a character who thinks he's a golem, and it takes place in the 20s, but it's also in the character's mind and has all sorts of mythology thrown in and reflections of stuff happening in the world, and kept trying to push it for years and years. And at one point I realized, look, this is also moving slowly, the people aren't as enthusiastic as they used to be. I'll just try to get something cobbled together with one of these fancy game offering tools. And somebody gave me a copy of Game Maker Studio, so the old one, not the one from the 2000s, but also not the latest version. I think it was the first version. It was called Studio, and I tried doing a game in that, and that's didn't go anywhere as well. And in January of last year, there were a few factors and inspirations, and it all came at once. And I was, okay, you know what? 10 days from now on, I'm going to work each day, not really game jam style. Take it slow, 3 hours, 4 hours, as much as needed. Let's see what concept I can come up with. If it's enjoyable and if it's nice, then I'll probably spend a while polishing it and see what comes out of it. And at the time I was losing a lot of time slacking off through Berlin. And I was at the flea market at one point and found a Game Boy. And that's where I first played Tetris. Like, never had a console back in the day, and I had the original Tetris, and I haven't played. I used to play it on like those counterfeit games and stuff like that, but that was when I played the original Tetris, and I realized, this is pretty simplistic and exciting overall. And then I said, let's look at some other puzzle games. I mean, Vip Ribbon was a pretty big influence, Lumines, Puyo Puyo, Puzzle Bobble, all of this stuff, but in the end nothing really beats Tetris. It's really entertaining, so I thought, let's see if we can do a sort of Tetris, but if it has like some physics puzzler elements in it. Also at the time I was really interested in going in the south of Berlin, where they have like this really nice minimalistic neighborhood, because whenever you think like of classic architecture or the Bauhaus, the classic German schools, you think like of these white utopic, sometimes dystopian buildings with their very minimalist style, but that's a very different neighborhood that was done in the 20s by two architects that weren't like part of the main Bauhaus school. They were close to it and they were very interested in experimenting with colors, and it's really nice because you have like very simple shapes like the ones I wanted to do in Reaction. You have like triangles, nonagons, octagons, all in pastel, very nice, very striking colors. The neighborhood is called Uncle Tom's Hütte, Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was designed by Bruno Taut and Hugo Hering. I mean, I really suggest, if people are interested in seeing like some nice otherworldly architecture, to search for some pictures online. And that's where I thought, something that's a bit like Tetris but with some physics and rotation and this type of stuff might work. I mean, at the time I was still too lazy to do the 10-day challenge to see what comes out, so I was still exchanging tons and tons of ideas with pastels and primary colors and stuff like that, because the paddle in the game, for instance, this was also came from me reading about the Bauhaus school, and I found a really interesting idea that the modern elevators have been around for a while, but the ones they designed, which is the one we know today, is inspired by grain elevators. So for instance, one of the architects, I don't remember, I think it was Walter Gropius, as a child he'd go to the countryside and see these conveyor belts rotating constantly to put the grain inside the granary, and I thought, so you have like a paddle hitting some stuff. What if you would play Tetris with a paddle? Could you put the pieces in order? That might be interesting. Or could you keep them in balance? Also, I visited the video game museum at that time, and we talked about retro earlier. I mean, today when you think of retro gaming, yeah, it's like Nintendo, the NES, or some people in Europe would be with the Commodore, or like in my case, the ZX Spectrum. But I was also really interested in the Atari 800, which I think is one of the underrated computers of the 70s actually. It came out in late 70. It had a really huge lifespan, and it has like this unique graphic palette. The computer itself is beige, and most of these games have like these very striking, minimalistic, well-defined colors. They don't really use textures that much. I mean, if you look online for Choplifter or Drop Zone, Rainbow Walker, Gyrus, Berserk, these types of game, they also have like lots of dark areas with some colors, some elements in the background which you might miss when you don't see, and you only have to fixate on the main shapes. So that was what I had in mind going in these things. And also at the time, I mean, I was punctuate more this industrial mechanicistic approach. I was listening to a lot of German experimental music, the so-called krautrock, although that's probably how the English-speaking language defines it. I mean, bands like early Kraftwerk, Can, Neu, the British band Beak, which is a modern revival, and they also have like this conveyor belt industrial plant approach with everything mechanicistic and cold. And after day one, I had the paddle rotating, and after about 3 days, I realized, okay, balance is out of the question. We need a game where you throw pieces on the sides, and it was very small. It was a very small window at the time. You only had like 3 or 4 pieces, but more or less after 3 days, gameplay was nailed. It was there. And then of course I thought, Tetris had 3 buttons. Let's see if we can keep this game to 2 buttons. 1 button under Tetris and under Puyo Puyo and all of the others. I was tempted to add a power-up button, but in the end I resisted. So day 4 had some power-ups, day 5 has some more power-ups. Also at the time I was like annoying people around and showing the game and asking them to play it. And even some of the music came from this period. I mean, I had an ukulele around and was trying to figure out some tunes, and my partner had this really great idea. What about this cool Balkanic folk song, which is also a bit rock and rollish, but it's also classic and has some oriental sounds to it, and that's the main theme. It's because again, I thought many of these songs, they have like a pretty repetitive theme, so but which is catchy and earwormy and also somewhat relaxing. So we had an old Apple lying around, used GarageBand on that to transfer the song really fast and turn it into a repetitive thing, and that was it basically. In 9 days, 10 days, the base game was all down, and then after that 1 whole year spent to polish it. And the polishing process was of course slow, repetitive, lots of trial and error, add the menu, add key configurations, add all sorts of sliders, I mean, that fix the graphics here, improve the physics a bit there because they're kind of wonky. I mean, this process is boring and it's not really going into it, but more or less those initial 10 days are still reflected today in it. That's the story of how the game came to be basically. And yeah, I passed it around to a few people, tried to not pass it to that many friends or not really close friends or people who, you know, would be like, just say it's cool for the sake of it or not to hurt my feelings. I mean, I really just tried to pass it around to a limited number of people, and once it was 99% done, started it posting it on 3 or 4 smaller indie dev forums.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, that's a great story, I think. I could definitely see a lot of the ties between the game and your story now of how you how those things came to be.
If you play it, you're probably not, your first reaction, pun intended, won't be, this is nice, I should probably go read a bit more about modernistic utopian architecture. That probably won't be your first thing. You know, hopefully at one might make you think, I want to find out something about this, or I have a passion about this thing. How could I integrate it into my own game and create something I like from it, or something that other people might like? I mean, even the name, which again I'll say now was kind of a bad choice. I was thinking most of these games have quirky titles: Puzzle Bubble, Puyo Puyo, Tetris. So I thought, let's go to something that's a bit older than that, not golden age of computers. I searched on Moby Games, and there's this really old lost game from the 70s for the Altair 8800 computer cold reaction. Not many people know much about it since it's a lost game, but I thought, okay, that's a good title there since many games have duplicate titles. Let's go to something that evokes that pre-Golden Age period.
I guess how many hours you spend, would you say, like a week? You mentioned like 3 to 4, but is that like consistent over the year? Or, and I guess how did you determine that you were going to put a year's worth of polish into it? Is it just more of like you had a gut feeling?
So one way, which isn't really the most healthiest, was just that, and I had this approach for years, and sometimes it works, otherwise it was kind of detrimental to life in general, is to end a day of working on something at a point where you think it kind of comes together, and if you think you'd work more, you'd probably break it or want to work even more. So for instance, in the first 3 days I worked they were pretty intensive. One was like 4 hours, one was 7 hours, something like that. But for instance, although I was thinking 10 days, no more, on day 5 I just implemented 3 power-ups, and surprisingly I had no bugs. It was like the first time everything worked perfectly, and I had 2 more power-ups, but I thought, no, I'll just get annoyed because for sure the next one or the one after that will cause issues and bugs and crashes. So that's it. I know I worked only 45 minutes today, but I'm happy with this. It looks nice. Let me have a happy rest of my day and not worry about this. Same thing over the course of the year. I mean, whenever I'd have time early in the morning, late at 9, in the afternoon, or whenever I'd have a break, I'd just add to it. And at one point it started coming together. After a few months, it was pretty clear. I'll have a menu with these things and the slider. Sure, after that I would add some more or remove a few. But for instance, if I was thinking, okay, I'll need to add the controls, the music settings, and the additional settings. If for instance I get really annoyed and I see, okay, I spent already 5 days today, the volume slider is a mess, this is a mess, let me just get one thing finished, then draw a line, add a comment here in the code, return here tomorrow, and that's it. So not push too hard, and also not leave things in a state where you'll return the next day and you'll think, what the hell was I even thinking? What was I coding here? What was I drawing here? What was I composing here? This makes no sense. So that's how it went. I mean, there were like many days in a row when I'd work for an hour or 2 a day, then I'd have like a whole break for a week or 2 where I wouldn't even touch it. But it was pretty consistent because being such a small project and learning new things in Game Maker, which I didn't have that much experience with before this, it was interesting. It was nice to find out how stuff works.
Okay, yeah, I definitely think that's a good way to go about it. I think that's kind of how I've gone around designing my games as well. I'd rather focus on the consistency of putting like little chunks of time into it, and I've definitely had days similar to when you're adding the power-ups of just it works and I'm very happy with that, and I'll take a break for now. So those are nice to have.
Yeah, I have an anecdote here. I'm not sure I believe it entirely myself, but I have a friend who was a game tester, I think, on Watch Dogs. I think it was Watch Dogs. He came pretty late into it. And they had like this testing chief who'd always add an extra thing. So for instance, they'd been working because the cars were flying. They shouldn't have been flying because there aren't flying cars in Watch Dogs, I think. And at one point when they were very near the end, somebody came, no, stop doing that. The cabbage there's not enough space between the cabbage. This isn't a realistic farm. You need to spread out the individual bits of cabbage a bit more on that field. And they were like, the cars aren't on the road. You want us to drop it, forget what we were testing and move to that? I don't know if the story is 100% true, but that's a perfect example because, you might feel like, okay, there are so many directions. I'll just tackle as much as possible in all directions. But no, at the end of the day, you just end up forgetting what you're doing and we'll repeat the same things over and over again.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That seems more of a prioritization issue.
Yeah.
Anything. But part of it is also you might want to procrastinate on those cabbage because you don't want to fix the flying cars right now. But that's also another issue.
Yeah, exactly. That's corporate procrastination, basically. Yeah, what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess I really liked the way you came up with the idea of using Tetris, and kind of you built off of those previous experiences that you had, and even the real world experience of on the farm and just seeing, I guess, the grain go into your elevator kind of example. I thought was really interesting how you just tied those two together. It was always really fascinating to me.
I mean, no, I wasn't that much of a Nintendo kid, but after that, when I was telling somebody about that story, he pointed it out, because I think this is probably the most famous example that Shigeru Miyamoto would basically do the same thing. I mean, that's why he'd remember, as a kid I would hide in caves and pretend to find a sword, and that was his idea for Zelda and stuff like that, rather than going, for the more... I don't think arcade is the correct word, because it's not a big thing, but for the more designed by committee approach to games, fixing exactly what would somebody want to play or stuff like that, or what would get me famous and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I think you do more, for just an experience rather than the end goal, so to speak.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. I did load the game, so let me go ahead and try to share my screen.
Before you start, fun fact, that's an interactive menu. An interactive menu. You can click on the pieces on the right hand side.
I did find that out, and I found that very interesting. Yeah. This is one of the more satisfying aspects of it, and I really enjoyed having that in it, because when I was, more of a side note, when I was doing the prep for this, I just left the game running in the background while I was taking kind of some additional notes about it, and then I noticed kind of how it was already all filled up, and I was like, I don't remember that being like that when I left, and then I accidentally just clicked it, and I was like, oh, they disappear, and the sound effect and design of that I think is really good.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot inspired by the loading screens from Symphony of the Night, where you can basically play with the text. I don't know if ever...
I haven't heard that game,
that
but
out.
Yeah, I'll look at it after.
Yeah, it's Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Oh, Castlevania, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. So I guess I will start with the menus. The configuration of it, I think it's pretty straightforward. The sound, having the sliders, really good. I thought that the play center and the center alignment was interesting. I think it's more just personal preference.
Yeah, that's also somewhat of a Tetris thing, because on the Game Boy you have it somewhat centered, but some people apparently are obsessed with playing it on the left hand side, others are playing it on the right hand side, and they buy those cheap knockoffs and take care what side it's on. So yeah, if apparently this is something people care a lot about in puzzle games, I guess so.
Oh, I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I mean, you find out a lot of weird facts reading and asking about these things.
I guess I did have a note about your key configuration. So when you configure the keys, did you use the left and right arrow key because of not everyone maybe having kind of WASD as the default?
Yeah. So left and right is the default.
Yeah. Okay.
One I chose.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because that threw me for a loop the first time. But I mean, also being in the U.S., I've only used WASD, so.
Oh really?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, it's I mean it's also just kind of my sort of default and bias is just everything is WASD. But I mean I totally get the using the arrow keys, because not everyone has, there's just different keyboard layouts, so you kind of are trying to make it more accessible to everybody by using the arrow keys. But that's more of just a personal note.
Yeah, and I do want to add, I mean, more or less, because you asked me about this last time. I mean, the game is more or less complete, but for sure at one point there will be a version 1.1 or maybe even a 1.2, because I mean, there aren't that many bugs yet, but some people did point out, it happens now, that quite often when you click on the configure keys button, you might by mistake click on reconfiguring rotate left. I mean, there are a few issues which will of course need to be addressed. And this is one of them.
Okay. Yeah, the one thing I did, so when I went into the configure keys, it auto made the rotate left my left mouse button, and I guess that was one thing that I found is. Like if I accidentally like it's already selected and I click it, I'm like, oh, like left mouse button, but that was just
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, probably I never ran into this, but it's probably my screen resolution because I have an unusual screen. So yeah, it's something that should be addressed because it's annoying.
okay. And then I did have a note kind of about your trailer that you have, particularly like
Oh yeah,
I really like the trailer, and
thank you.
it really kind of personified the shapes of, each one had their personality, and I think like the octagon had kind of a darker, like more ominous feel to it, and then like each of the shapes essentially just had their own personality, and I was like, oh, that's great. And what I also liked is you added eyes to all of them, and you added like sort of a screen shake, and like not screen shake, you added kind of animations of like they were leaning into when they were talking, and like they would move and stuff. And I was curious of, do you plan on adding sort of that art into the game, with like those eyes and whatnot?
So you probably noticed already that, yeah, I think that was something like an in-joke. You noticed that you can add faces to them now, right? But they're like minimal. They're very, yeah, they're very minimalistic compared to how they appear in that art. And that one, those have big, bubbly anime like eyes, while these have these smaller expressions. Comes back to that thing. So, like I was saying, I mean, it was very cold Germanic style music and very industrial style thing, but then I realized, it's maybe a bit too cold, and it would be funny to have like these small folks being angry or passive aggressive or a bit aloof, etc. And you did notice my Discord avatar, right?
Yes, I did notice.
Yeah, this is so I don't think I'll add it to the game per se, but this is another thing I didn't add in the hype section, and because it's probably not going to happen in the near future, but I do plan, because I want to be a bit environment responsible, but also I know people kind of enjoy collector stuff. I'm manually trying to do some boxes and figurines, and people will be able, if they want, and maybe I'll even send a few to like reviewers and stuff, to order their packaged version of the game, which will have like this cute little box, and it will have like the shapes, the ones made of clay, some random ones like the square or the triangle, plus also like a miniature version of that poster and the more extended art. So I'm going to use that for this version of the box. I was very inspired by somebody who did something similar to like a matchbox version of Prince of Persia.
Oh yeah, that's a really good idea to do that.
Yeah, that was one of my plans, but I don't think I'll insert it in the game itself. I mean, yeah, the dissonance was a bit intentional.
Yeah, then going through some other kind of feedback I had of the speed, from playing it a decent amount so far, extrapolated that it's essentially the shapes per second that are going into it, but
yeah, and the duration of the power-ups, but not as much. Yeah, you're right.
So yeah, that wasn't essentially necessarily clear. Like I don't know what a speed of 1 versus a speed of 2 meant, other than for speed I can correlate that of, okay, maybe it's just the rate at which. I think the more pressing one is with difficulty. I have no idea what a difficulty 1 compared to a difficulty 2 is. From obviously have playing it, to me the hardest shapes by far are the squares, and the easiest are probably the triangles, and then it kind of will escalate into maybe the rounder shapes like your octagon, hexagon, and your pentagon. But I'm assuming the difficulty means that the higher it goes, the more squares essentially that it will be. And I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, the spawning algorithm is one thing. Amount of power-ups decreases. And also the spawning position is influenced by the difficulty. So after a certain difficulty, they won't spawn from the same point.
Oh, actually, so it would probably be lower, like closer to the paddle, then, if I.
Height, not so much. It's also a minuscule difference, but they might spawn on the sides, which for the squares, yeah, is a big issue because they might fall directly and block the hole immediately or something like that.
Well, that's interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, the consideration of this, I mean, I'm still torn a bit about this because I was thinking again in terms of how this would feel. So, I mean, back in the day, I don't know, you'd get like a bootleg or a secondhand CD or something, and on it you'd have like a clone of Puzzle Bubble or something. You don't have the manual, you don't have the readme. It's a bit entertaining when you're young and you think, you have a lot of terms there that are explained in the manual, but you don't have it, so you need to figure them out yourself, and it's kind of fun, but at the same time I feel a bit guilty for wasting people's time. So yeah, I think those things should be documented, if not in the game itself, then maybe in the readme file or somewhere.
Okay, yeah, I definitely think putting that information somewhere for someone who's interested in it and like wants to get good at your game, it will kind of give them a leg up to know how they could get better, I think.
Yeah, true. And it's also for accessibility, yeah, for people who have some troubles, it could help.
And then, yeah, kind of going into the power-ups, I know you mentioned you had 3, and I think they're really good. I think they're 3. Are there?
There are 6. There are 6 in total. Yeah, I mean, I implemented 3 in one day, and the others over the next few days. There are 6 in total.
Got it. Because yeah, initially when they're like slightly different than the pieces, or sorry, the shapes. So I didn't know how to interact with them was a big thing.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say that this is also not immediately obvious, so you can take them and use them, but if you miss them, you get extra points, so they're worth a lot of points. So if you're going for the score, it's an extra element of difficulty that you don't get the power up but try to evacuate it.
Oh, interesting. So that's a bit of strategy to that. Okay. I had never even thought about missing them intentionally. But yeah, the goal is to get a high score, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought of it a bit as a surprise. It was like, oh no, I'm not taking it, I'm going to lose this power up, and then but the score increased, but then I realized nobody actually follows the score, so that element of surprise is lost.
Right. I definitely can see that. And so actually, let me go into kind of just the play mode real quick. Having some kind of feedback, I guess, in it to know like if I missed a shape, or if what am I trying to say? If I put a power up in it, I think like an explosion at the bottom or something, I think would really emphasize that like you got more points and you did, a quote unquote a good thing instead of like a loss per se.
Fair point, and I wrote that down.
Yeah, initially, because I kind of went into it pretty blind of when I saw sort of this balance thing, like I immediately like tried to get all the shapes and put them all like here and try to stack them up. And I didn't realize that there were arrows at the bottom. I don't know if maybe I was just focused on trying to interact with the paddle and like, I bring it back to like the WASD thing of I didn't know about using the arrow keys. Like I had kind of just missed the arrows. So maybe extend them until you get like a first, few pieces down.
No, I think you had the earlier version on Discord, because I added that one day before release because a lot of people were complaining about not knowing whether they should evacuate them or balance them.
Oh, okay. Got it. Oh, that's good on you for taking in constructive criticism. Kind of another thought I had of getting all the sort of pieces would be to kind of encourage people to get a lot of pieces in like quick succession. So like adding like a combo system of like, if you do like, 3 or 4 pieces like really quickly, you get like, 2 squares like in a row or something, which is like, decently hard to do, to kind of emphasize that and almost make it maybe even like a bit cartoony in a sense that, you're accomplishing a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And it feels pretty good. Like when you get like, especially this power up, which I think is honestly quite overpowered
Yeah, that's the most OP I've done by far.
Of you can just sit here at this point and essentially go as long as you want because you're kind of just limited by that. But I'll scrap them just to keep it interesting. Another thing I had, so when you say that the carried pieces, are those just the pieces that have gone through?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember this because there's I don't remember exactly, but I think the destroyed pieces don't count as carried pieces. Yeah, I really forgot if they do or they don't.
Okay. Some other feedback. Yeah, I mean, overall, like I do like the feel of it. It's very active. The music is very calming. It has the particles are nice in sort of the background. Like it's got some dynamic part in the sense that it's just nice to look at, but it's not just like a static screen.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I had a lot of imposter syndrome thinking that it was like too banal with the lack of diverse graphics and the limited texture palette.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had a similar vein too of I didn't think having a dynamic background would add a lot to a game until like you see the difference between just a static screen, so to speak, and then going to a dynamic one. Like it's definitely a lot more engaging and interesting. Of you kind of have to entertain the player with movement first, and then they will kind of just draw their attention to the game itself, and they can kind of go from there.
You all had a high score earlier as well. You also had 4th place. Nice.
Yeah, that was kind of a part of my cheating as well with the overpowered component or power up. So another thing I wanted to add was kind of the variety in the levels of, I mean, I understand you made just a very well polished, like a one paddle setup, and you have 2 different sort of slots that they can go into. Definitely having, I think, a bit more variety of maybe even like multiple paddles or different slots you can go in. You could think of more of like maybe even like a Plinko machine, or having kind of more of like also like a pinball setup of you have multiple paddles like on the left and the right, or you kind of have to adjust the paddles. I think it'd be interesting because you kind of have to balance the two. If like you see a square on the right, but then like a triangle on the left, like you want to prioritize that, but you're definitely going to affect both at the same time, which I think is an interesting idea. And I'm curious to see how something like that would sort of play out.
Yes, so those are great ideas, and I'll consider them as well because one of the additional power-ups, or rather power-downs for version 1.1 that I'm trying to implement would affect the play field. So for instance, one of them would take like the evacuation shafts, would close them and would open only one dead center, and another one would make the screen start to decrease slowly. So of course you'll have to panic because it might spill if you have too many pieces. But yeah, additional paddles, that's also a really good idea to have like a pinball setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reverse one always gets me. I think it's very jarring the first time you get it, but it's a good one. Another note I had was it's more or less, it's pretty easy to master. Of you kind of get the gist of the game, within, I would say, 10-15 minutes, which is, I think, a good thing because you can kind of focus on kind of the more complexities of it. The kind of downside to that is it's hard to keep players engaged, I think, after they've felt like they've mastered it. That being said, that kind of leads into my second idea of kind of just progression in general. Of getting the high score is one thing, but I think it really would benefit from just more sort of, I'll call content of, I'm gonna lose, of just having more levels, even like setting goals for the player. Like I think a good example would be something like Candy Crush, where you just have a lot of levels that are slightly different, or at least just have different goals around that level to say, like, start at a difficulty 5 and just see how far you can go, or focus on carried numbers, or so your carries, rather than like getting a high score, or just try to challenge the player a little bit more. And then for the people that do want to do that and like get achievements and little things like that, so they can kind of measure their progression, which I think would be cool. And I don't know if you do any like data tracking in the background of like what are the total amount of items, or sorry, shapes I've carried, and like the total score I've accumulated since playing. I mean, particularly, I think.
Oh, no. It's like, so the data is collected at the start of each game, and then once you get a high score, it's written in the board and removed. It's not saved anywhere on the disk or online or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, somebody also suggested, and I really like this idea, to have like a mode in which you'll have like only 2 colors and try to, and all of the shapes in 2 colors, and try to gain points only by using the one on the left hand side for a color and the other one for the other color, and you lose points if you don't miss the if you don't put them in the correct slots. And this is also a great idea. I mean, my issue here, and this might sound a bit weird, because Candy Crush is a great example. I wanted to have people enjoy it, but I didn't want them to get addicted. Well, it's not really possible, because it's not like the most addicting concept, but still, or rage quit or stuff like that. I was going for something you might enjoy in 1 or 2 short bursts, and then, I don't know, maybe want to go to it back a bit later. I would feel guilty if people would spend a lot of their time playing it obsessively, because I know that gaming and addiction have a really sad story together, and we're hearing more and more of this. But indeed, diversity is not the same. So yeah, it could be like more diverse, and somebody might want to now do one type of challenge, and then, like you mentioned, the other Candy Crush style one, and then after 2 days or a few hours come back for the next challenge. Somebody even complained, for instance, that the time between you lose the game and the start of the next game is too long, that they they would want to be able to get back in the game faster. And then, whoa, slow down, take a break, fix your position, drink some water, stay hydrated. There's more to life than rotating pieces around.
Right. Yeah, I guess I get both sides of it too. Having like a retry button, I don't think would be a bad thing, but yeah, if someone's that eager to go into the next session or round of it, but yeah, it has kind of more implications.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The last sort of feedback I had, to kind of sum it all up, was I definitely think it'd be a kind of a good mobile game, to be honest. Kind of feeding more into that, I would not necessarily Candy Crush vibe, but more of it is such a simple mechanic in the sense that you do have 2 buttons, so having just the option to you just click on the left or right of the screen, and it's simple enough that I think you could, like you said, you could pick it up, play a little bit, if you're going somewhere on a train or whatnot, and then you're just oh, I got a high score, and then you can move forward with it. I think being on mobile, I think, would be a good fit for this.
It might even be more fun on mobile, because you could, for instance, rotate your hand on the touchscreen. So rather than using buttons, you could, for instance, grab the paddle with your thumb and then rotate it around. I don't know. I'll be honest, I know very little when it comes to mobile stuff. I mean, I still have a black and white Java 2ME old mobile phone. I don't have a smartphone. I don't like them in particular. I have an old second-hand modded PSP that I carry around with me for mobile gaming. So yeah, I mean, the quote I even used for the page, the one with from a friend which wanted to remain anonymous, don't know if I'd play this for a couple of minutes, that was in the context of if I had it on the phone. So yeah, people have been saying that I don't know enough to have an opinion about this. I'll have to look into it a bit more. I mean, I know the mobile phone game market is like a wasteland right now with clones of clones upon clones. Don't really know what's going on there, but in the abstract, from a gameplay perspective, I can see how it would be more enjoyable on a portable device with a touch screen.
Exactly. So I guess in summary, have gone through kind of all of my feedback about it. I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a good, simple game that has a good mechanic that you can very easily expand upon if you if you desire.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, yeah, your feedback is greatly appreciated, and I'll think about this. I mean, like I said, a few things for sure they'll be implemented in one way or another in the next version. As for whether I'll revisit this concept or not, we'll see. I mean, I thought of this idea with the premise I described earlier, with the minimalistic palette colors, to use it in like a small trilogy, and hopefully by next year I'll have the second installment in that one. But it's not a physics puzzler, so we'll see. But I'm sure the characters, the cubes with the shapes with faces, they'll make a comeback for sure.
Great. I didn't know if there was any other kind of final things that you wanted to highlight about the game that maybe I didn't cover.
Not really. I mean, the only other thing is, I imagine, the multiplayer, which is only local so far. So yeah, you'd need like another person at this computer. So, but it's pretty basic. I mean, you can't really sabotage the other player or something. It's just like two people playing more or less independently in a survival style mode.
I see. Okay. I actually had not tried it yet.
The only unique feature is that only the power-ups are first come first served. So once a player takes, the shapes come in an identical order, but once one of the players takes a power-up, it's gone.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I guess even having this as like like a like a player. I mean, like I'm playing it like by myself. You know, I was with one.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is actually pretty interesting to just like play because it's as one person, not necessarily like I know the intention was with other people. I say, yeah, it's like an interesting trade off because my brain wants to do one thing with one paddle and like look at one.
I was taking footage for the trailer and then showed the trailer to somebody, and it also touches a bit on multiplayer, and that person's first reaction was, why were you playing against yourself in the multiplayer segment? It was so obvious that you were doing both paddles.
Yeah, I guess it is because you you rotate them the same, and
yeah.
That's funny though. Okay. I guess I didn't have any other things other than, yeah, I guess just thank you for I mean, one, making the game, and two, for wanting to discuss more about it and just try to just talk more about just game dev in general. I think it's always interesting to do.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I mean, it was very interesting and eye-opening in one regard.
Good, yeah. I mean, likewise. I think you've been around the games industry as far as like the development and games go more than I have, so it's always nice to hear different ways to go about this game dev problem, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, really marginally, but yeah, I've kept an eye out.
Right.
I mean, if my one tip here would be, because one thing I kept seeing back in the day, and I see even now, I mean, of course, then it was on forums, now it's on Discord or somewhere, you'd have like the message, hello, I'm a programmer going to do a dev game, and I'd want 2 artists, 3 musicians, 1 texture person, 1 sound designer, 3. Yeah, it's, I mean, I'm bad at all from coding to music, but try. It's good for people to try at least to have an idea of how they're done, if not really doing them themselves. So yeah, and try to have like some place holders, or get some art from opengameart.net or from some resource or something, and then present it if they don't want to be one-man projects. I mean, going with the idea, I have this great idea and I can fulfill one of the things, let's do it, we'll get rich and then split up the money. Yeah, needless to say, this never works.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I'm of the mindset of you should try the whole process, like from start to finish. Like try to do everything on your own as well. Of, it's different starting from like, oh, I go from a tutorial to like, I'll edit that tutorial to like going from an empty project and like, oh, what was that script that we made in that tutorial to like move the player, and going that route. And that's the obviously more programming side of it. But even, when you have to like sit down and you make your art, or think of like, what art style do I want to have, there's a different also creative aspect to it that, like, I found out, like, I actually like the art aspect, I guess, as well. Then like you start to get into things like, animation, and then maybe eventually you have to go and like market your game. So you have to kind of, how do I take things that are in the game and make it accessible to people to show them? And so going through that whole process of like, what do you need, is not so obvious at first. So I guess to sum it up, yeah, trying everything out and getting stuff that's free when you can, in terms of assets like art, sound, I think are the most obvious ones I can think of. And just try to just go through it until you feel that, okay, this is not perfect, but it's worth it in the state that it's in. Like I could definitely spend, another year or months, on a project, but if it's not going to improve it that much, then it's better to just get it out there and then move on and take those learnings and move forward. That's when you maybe will consider, a team of like, okay, I don't really like sort of the marketing, or I prefer to have an artist, not because it's necessarily easy, but it's more of, as a developer, you're like, I just don't want to do it, and I think someone could do it better. So you kind of more of a strength and weaknesses sort of a conversation at that point, because you're like, okay, I've made art and I know how to integrate it, but I know it could be better. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It sounds like we're in a pretty similar vein.
Yeah, fully agree. And I mean, this sounds like cliche, but step outside of your comfort zone, because I mean, even if you'll get an artist to do the art for you, eventually understanding how the software works and doing like hand-drawn art or music, I mean, you might think, okay, I'm not musical, but rather than taking an open source track for somewhere and slapping it on top, you can do that as a placeholder. But I don't know, get like a free music software like LMMS, which I'm using now, or get a second-hand harmonica or a recorder or a cheap instrument, watch some videos on YouTube, go with some people who are far better, ask them to teach you. Same with art, take your drawings to like a meeting somewhere, well, after the quarantine is over, but after the pandemic's over, but then now you can do it digitally. Go meet with people and draw, play together, learn some other skills that don't seem to make sense in that context, because then you'll see them differently. I mean, for instance, now you're just thinking, I want epic music to my RPG, but then I don't know, if you learn some very basic rhythm things on a recorder, you'll think, haha, this punctuates it. You have the hero walking, and this very simplistic do re mi progression goes each time my character walks, or something like that, and you'll have like this more holistic way of looking at the whole experience and how the game gets put together. Plus, even if you don't use it, you have a lot of leftovers for future projects or trailers or stuff like you might need in the future.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of that extra stuff, it doesn't seem beneficial at first, and yeah, looking back, I'm like, oh, I'm glad like I did it. Like particularly, like I remember I took pictures of like my early builds of like the first level of the game, and I was like, oh man, I don't know, this seems cheesy to keep, but like I'll keep it. And then like I look back at it now, and then look at what the game is now, and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's changed a lot. and it's just like it's really satisfying to have.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's like there's a satisfaction to go back and see. It also helps a bit, like if you have a lot of self-doubt, you can think, well, yeah, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's obviously better than it was at the start.
Right. And I guess progression is probably the biggest thing of like, you started off at, nothing and you have something. It's always better than what you started with because it's, it's nothing. Even if I think of it more of like game ratings, like maybe like a Steam review of it, even if I do get like a 60 or a 70, let's say, it's better than 0 because at least you tried. Some people, may not even get that far. And I think that's something to also.
Yeah. And it's better than no review at all.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So excellent. Okay. I do have to get to work in like 7 minutes.
Okay, so that's a wrap basically.
So yeah, I think we'll close it out there.
Thank you for joining us today and listening to our discussion about generating hype and reaction. Special thanks to Ioni for working with me on this. I had a wonderful time chatting and learned quite a bit. Please feel free to check out Reaction on itch.io and share your thoughts about it. Link to the game is in the description. I'm interested to hear what you think about our discussion in the podcast. What did you learn from the discussion? Did you like the podcast? Are you interested in hearing more from game developers? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like the video, hit the subscribe button, and share if you like the podcast. If you would like to be a part of the podcast, reach out to me on Discord at Aaron711 pound 3339. Thank you again for being here today, and hope to see you again on Beyond the Loading Screen.